Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site covering Arizona Cardinals. And it is our second show of the week. It is episode 689. It is our final show before roster cutdowns. I'm with my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And we're just a couple of days, recording Thursday night. We're 2 days away from the Cardinals' final preseason game and a little less than 5 days away from quote unquote final cuts, because the final cuts means that there's more cuts after that and all that stuff, waivers and trades and blah, 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 blah. But it's finally here, Seth. We're finally at all the projections, and there are decisions to be made, and those are coming in the next few days.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not gonna. I just don't see a lot of surprises, right? Like, this is a pretty top-heavy roster. They're still in the process of creating competitive depth, as we saw last game, and right now we know who they are, we know what they have, and we're just getting ready for the regular season and seeing kind of potentially back end of the thing.
And there's going to be lots of decisions to be made. But what we're going to start with, we've basically like 4 parts to this show today. That would be talking about what are we watching in this preseason finale? There are some injury decisions with IR and the PUP list. We'll get into that. Possible trades. Who might be guys the Cardinals send away? And then who, not necessarily individual players, but positions that they might use in the trade market. Lastly, we'll give our 53-man roster projections based on what we know entering the final preseason game. Let's just start with this preseason game this weekend against the Las Vegas Raiders Saturday night. And Jonathan Gannon revealed, as we expected, that it'll be kind of the similar, is what he said, in game plan for this Saturday, as was last weekend, which means we won't see starters. And I would say, since he didn't say the same plan, he said similar, I'm guessing that we won't even see Jacoby Brissett. We won't see John Gaines. We won't see Will Johnson. We won't see Akeem Davis-Gaither. That it will be 100% back of the roster / just get us through the guys battling for the final roster spots, special teams guys, and the guys that won't be playing football ultimately.
Right. So, it's one of those things where people get uppity and they get upset and like, oh, I can't believe this or that or that. And it's like, guys, it's was never gonna be a big game, right? Like, this is how the preseason works, and you can go back and forth, and the reality is going to be they'll have to answer for it if they have if they start slowly. I did see some interesting things today. Like, people are like, well, they had a bad record against winning teams and didn't score as many points. I'm like, so playing against the Las Vegas Raiders second team is going to make the difference in that? Like exactly. I'm not trying to be rude, but like,
exactly. And we know what the Cardinals were last year. They were a perfectly mediocre team, because who did they lose to? 8 of their 9 wins, 8 of their 9 losses came to teams who won 10 or more games. The only bad loss was Carolina. They beat the teams they should have, and they lost to teams they weren't supposed to beat by and large last season. And so yeah, I don't buy, especially, and here's the thing. Here's the other thing. The final preseason game is 15 days before the regular season opener. Even if you play the starters, you're going to be like, if rust is a thing, rust is going to be a thing anyway, right?
Right. That's kind of where I was at with this. So I just, it's interesting. I've never cared. Especially because like I feel like it's just too much picking and choosing how you go about it, right? Like, oh, you've got to have this guy play, but don't play this guy, or like it's like no, I'm of the opinion like it's either everybody goes or nobody goes, right? Like, and so for me, if nobody goes, then nobody goes. Like I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. But heading into this game, who are the players that you are watching in particular, both offense and defense? I think this is going to be one of those games where it is heavy on the Michael Carter and Bam Knight, and my guess is going to be Michael Carter is going to look good, provided that the offensive line is on par with the back end of the roster defensive line of the Raiders.
Yeah, and it'll be one of those games where people, after spoiler alert, Michael Carter gets cut and brought back to the practice squad, and like, I can't believe he got cut. Like, what is going on? It's like
he's playing in the third preseason game. That's why.
Right. Well, and guys, like we talked about last year, like if he had legitimate NFL, like I don't want to say value because he has value obviously, but like if he had like legitimate NFL talent, don't you think a team would have claimed him at some point last year?
He's a talented player, but when it comes to like, he's kind of a guy that you see all over the NFL. Now you give him a chance, he's gonna produce, but like on this Cardinals roster, the Cardinals running back room is well put together. He's definitely not the starter, so he's not as good as James Conner. He doesn't have the upside as a backup running back that Trey Benson gives you. He's not as good a third down back as Amari DiMercato, and doesn't play special teams or return kicks the way DiMercato or DJ Dallas. And when you aren't better in any of the roles, how can you have a role on the team? Because those are the roles you can have as a running back. That said, I'm excited to watch him. I'm excited to see how he does, because he is an extremely exciting runner to see when he gets in the open field.
Yeah, and like you said, he's a good player. So it's not like he's a bad player by any means. It's just, the way it comes about, he just doesn't fit into things sans an injury.
Yeah. Xavier Weaver. I always say the name. So Xavier Weaver is a guy I'm watching. I'm wondering if Simi Fehoko even plays after getting that work in, or if he will be one of those guys that is considered one of the key backups and won't play.
That's what I was thinking.
Xavier Weaver's got stuff to prove.
Yeah, I don't think we see him. I think Weaver's going to get some run. Obviously, Taywan Palmer, Bryson Green.
Gotta love Andre Bocelli. He'll be out there.
Andre Bocelli, the Nate McCollum. Those guys will be out there.
Yep. I'm interested in the play of Josh Fryer.
Yeah, because of the injuries, right? Like with Christian Jones down, do they keep a second tackle now?
Yeah.
Like a second tackle only, or are they more interested in some versatility until Jones can either come back or they go get a veteran? I'm really interested in the inside linebacker rotation, like Owen Papo,
yes. Mike Walker, Cody Simon.
Right. How does it look? I mean, no offense to V Jones or JJ Russell, don't care, but like, those three and like what's going on.
So I've got a question. as far as I know, did JJ Russell get cleared from concussion protocol?
I don't know. I don't see the red on his name. So like, I don't see him in the red. I think he did.
Because I remember when in camp he had the no contact jersey, so he was a step from being cleared. Maybe Russell, because Russell didn't even play last week, so maybe he's got a spot on the roster already.
Could be.
And so maybe it's coming down to one spot, because we know Mac, we know Davis Gaither, we know if that's in fact JJ Russell, then you've got one guy. Oh, in fact, maybe none of those guys, because you've got Cody Simon, and they kept everyone says they kept 3 inside linebackers, and then they really kept 4. Say they had 3 inside linebackers on the initial 53, but that was because they carried Elijah Jones for an extra day so he could go on injured reserve and be eligible to return. And the very next day they re-signed Chris Barnes. And so they had 4 inside linebackers on the roster the entire time. And the previous year, I think they had 5 in 2023 when they had Zeke Turner on the roster as well. But I could be, maybe that was 2022, because they've kept 5 before. 4 seems to be the right amount. But if JJ Russell's already there, then there's going to be no Mike Walker, and there's going to be no Owen Papo, because Akeem Davis Gaither is the reason why he was out there, I think, is to quote unquote compete for the starting job next to Mac Wilson, I think. Or maybe Russell has never been officially cleared. I don't know. Or he just hasn't been playing. I'm not sure. That's the interesting one, because he's been completely off my radar.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always hard to tell with when situations like that are arising too, right?
Yeah. The other guys to watch, of course, like there's guys to watch on the defensive line. PJ Mustipher has been a guy that's been getting some buzz, and when a guy gets buzz, that's because there's for a reason. So PJ Mustipher and Elijah Simmons on the defensive line, I think, are guys to watch. And then on the back end, the potential battle between Joey Blunt and Keaton Crawford, for whoever, like, if they keep 5 safeties, can they keep 5 safeties, or which one of those guys is going to make the roster?
Yeah, exactly. And like, how do you go about it? Because that's what people don't understand, right? About when you're figuring these things out, or breaking them down, it's like there does become a numbers crunch with guys like Elijah Simmons, PJ Mustipher, Keaton Crawford, Joey Blunt. Like you even mentioned it with JJ Russell and potentially Owen Papo and Mike Walker, right? Like there becomes this, and I don't want to say like Cody Simon's a lock to make the 53, but like Cody Simon feels like a lock to make the 53, right? So like you have Akeem, you have Mac, you have Cody Simon. So if they keep 4, to your point, like it's like, okay, who's number 4? If they are going to keep 5, that's still a question, right? Like who's 5 then? Like who are 4 and 5? We don't know. And so that's the interesting thing about how they do this. But then also you have to look at certain things too, right? BJ Ojulari, Bilal Nichols, Walter Nolan, all 3 players that would, be on the roster, starting on PUP. So then you go to, okay, who makes the initial roster until those guys can go, right? Something we'll talk about, obviously, but you mentioned the linebackers, but like, what about the edge rushers? Like, are we going to see Jordan Burch and Xavier Thomas? Because I feel like they're as locks for the initial 53. Well, Burch is a lock, but like I feel like Thomas at this point is a lock in the sense of Ojulari's on the PUP, so he won't be ready, and you still want to have 5 guys that can come off the edge. So like, do we see those guys, or is it just straight Elliott Brown and Benton Whitley getting 70 snaps in the game? So that's
my guess is that to have depth, that they will have Burch, Thomas, Whitley, and Brown all playing. I'm guessing.
And so, and then you look at it too, right? Like today, JG came out talking about Keitrell Clark, how well he's done, blah, blah, blah. Does it mean anything? I mean, that's always a question, right?
Well, like I'm going to say is we got to go back to that when he was drafted in 2023. Keitrell is like Gannon's kid. He's a Louisville kid. He really impressed him early on. And so like coaches have their guys, right? They always have their guys. And like Keitrell just might be that, which gives him a slight edge over, say, like as cornerback 4/5 there on the roster with Denzel Burke, who we have to figure is probably favored to make the roster. That Clark's gonna get the nod over a Darren Hall or over an Elijah Jones like that.
Right. And Elijah is going to be one of those to watch because he's just like, he was in late last week, right? Like he's in late, and people are going to be like, well, he played well. Well, again, he did. You're right. So we'll see.
Yeah. And so with that, any other player in particular that you're watching for, like we understand, Cardinals fans, if you're listening, we understand for those of you who are watching preseason game 3, you are the die-hardest of the die-hard because, or you either are dialed into the very back end of the 53-man roster, or you just don't care and like watching the Cardinals play. So you're falling into one of two categories. So if you are dialed in, well, good luck. This will be a game to watch. Just remember, keep perspective. Honestly, none of these roster decisions that come to the back of the roster honestly will impact wins and losses for the season. It's by and large, they won't impact the wins and losses. It might be more about the future of the team because these are guys that largely won't see the field.
Right. And more than that is these are guys these are guys,
the stars of the UFL next spring.
That, and they're playing selfishly. They're going to be playing for themselves, yes. Right? Like they got something to prove. They need good game film. They're gonna freelance a little more than they probably should. They're gonna do things outside of, because they know. I mean, and I'm not trying to be mean, right? But like, a guy like Stephen Gilmore, he knows, right? Like he's like, I'm not making this roster. So like, if I'm tracking something, if I'm seeing something and I want to take a shot on it, I'm going to do that tonight. Like that's how that works. And so you can get some really big plays or really positive plays and really negative plays. And that's where it becomes an interesting conundrum.
Coming up next on the Res Here podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web, we go on to discuss the intricacies of roster building with injuries, IR, and more. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Here podcast, the Star Cardinals Talk on the web. The other part, the factors that we alluded to building that final 53-man roster are the reserve lists, one being injured reserve and one being PUP, the physically unable to perform. I wrote an article on Cards Wire on Monday detailing kind of the ins and outs of that. And this, honestly, it affects the Cardinals quite a bit because they right now have 4 players on PUP, which is a unique reserve. These are for guys who had injuries that predated training camp, and the only guys who can be on PUP are guys who never passed their training camp physical. And without that, they start on that list. And if they do not come off that list, they were placed and they bypass the final 53 and go on the reserve, the PUP reserve, where they'll be out for at least 4 games and then can be brought back at any time during the rest of the season. What I wrote said that there was a 5-week window after week 4 that the teams had to make a decision. Howard Balzer double check that for me. Now, while I saw that on many publications, as I did try to fact check that, there is no limitation. So if you start the season on PUP And again, the only players who can be on the regular season PUP are the ones who were never physically cleared for training camp. And so it is a unique reserve. And there is no limit to the guys that you can have on there because it is narrow in scope to begin with. So the Cardinals right now have 4 guys. They started with rookie first-round pick Walter Nolan, veteran Bilal Nichols, and outside linebacker B.J. Ojulari. Nolan, who suffered a calf injury training a few days before camp. Bilal Nichols, who got hurt in week 6, injured his neck, has not recovered yet. And B.J. Ojulari, who Jonathan Gannon says his rehab is going on track, is going fine, but is more than a calendar year past his ACL tear and surgery and still has not been cleared to practice. And then they added, when they signed Will Hernandez, who was medically cleared for football activities, but he's not up to snuff yet. He begins, he is currently on PUP. And while some people say, it was after training camp started, forget this. He wasn't signed, so that doesn't apply. So he never passed a physical. He never passed a physical for training camp, so he can start there. Of those 4 guys, if you had to pick, how many of them do you think are going to come off and be put on the 53?
0. You mean right before, like the initial 53?
Yes, because they'd have to occupy. So they're going to be activated so they can be on the 53. I saw where the Buccaneers are doing that with Chris Godwin, even though he's not going to be ready to play. They want him to be able to practice, I guess, and so they don't want him to miss 4 games and then have to ramp up. And so they're going to take him off PUP and put him on the 53. Do you think you don't think the Cardinals are going to do that with any of those 4 guys?
Nope, I don't think any of them.
And that's my belief too. I think of the 4, I think the one that has the highest likelihood of coming off and being activated before roster cuts, I think it's Ojulari.
I would, and by the way, I would agree with that.
Says Will Hernandez, I think they signed him to become a future roster problem, so they've got depth later on. So I think that was always the plan. Bilal Nichols, I've already said, I think he's done with football. That is not trying to think. I think he had a neck injury. Remember, he had a neck injury in week 6, and a neck injury that you're coming back from. He should have been back long ago already. And the fact that he's not cleared, that tells me that his football career is in jeopardy. I think that's the case, that his football career continuing is in jeopardy. And well, why is he on the roster still? Well, that's simple money. That's being smart with your money. If you recall, like when Earl Thomas broke his leg, or his ankle or whatever would happen against the Cardinals, and he wasn't going to play for he never played again for the Seahawks. It would have been foolish for him financially to quote unquote retire. And if Bilal Nichols can't play, sure, he could retire, but the Cardinals owe him nearly $6 million in guaranteed salary. So why in the world would you do that even if you can't play? Well, you just rehab and you let your contract play out, and then the Cardinals will cut him next year when they have no guarantees left on the deal. So I personally think, and because no one's mentioned him at all, like the writing on the wall says Bilal Nichols is probably done with football. Nolan, because he's a rookie, not getting to do any training camp, I think, especially after the Darius Robinson, I think they're going to need to give him the 4 weeks to do the stuff on the side and then ramp up after that. I don't know. I just when he got hurt and Ian Rappaport said it was going to come up against the season, I'm like, there's no way he's going to begin the season on PUP. And so I think B.J. Ojulari is the one maybe possibility, and only because I think if they can get him healthy enough, there might be a little bit of trade value for him, because like we've talked about before, I think the Cardinals have their outside linebacker room has basically moved on from Ojulari.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I'm looking at it too. Like they have to prepare for life after BJ and go from that perspective. And so like where do you start? And then if BJ can come back or does, show back up and can make any kind of impact, it's just a bonus at that point, right?
It is 100%. And injuries down the stretch, you never know. So if someone gets hurt in the first 3 games, let's be honest, Baron Browning has had injury issues in his career, right? He hasn't been the super durable guy. Having BJ come back after a month wouldn't be a bad thing. Now, the other thing is the injured reserve, because traditionally, up until last year, if a player landed on injured reserve before being on the 53-man roster, season done. And so you had to carry a player at least a day. And so you had to cut a guy that you wanted on the 53 to carry this guy on IR, then put him on IR, then hopefully the guy that you wanted on the roster clears waivers and you can re-sign it. The league allowed, beginning last year, and that continues this year, that you may designate, so you can take 2 players, put them on IR, designate them to return, and bypass the 53, and they never have to. And last offseason, they did that for Darius Robinson and for Christian Jones. And because they had those 2, they knew they wanted to come back. And then the third guy, Elijah Jones, who ended up on IR, they carried for a day, as I previously mentioned. So 3 guys right now to watch for that. Justin Jones, who's missed the preseason with a knee injury after he missed 14 games with a torn triceps. Also, Christian Jones again, knee injury. Jonathan Gannon said would miss quote unquote some time, which means multiple weeks. And then rookie guard center Hayden Connor, who injured his knee on play 3 last weekend, also going to miss quote unquote some time. Barring, since those are the real only injuries, given the 3 of them, do you think any of them will be? Do you think any of those guys are going to be IR designated to return? Or do you think any of them? Do you think any and all 3 would be on the roster healthy? First of all,
Man, I did my overall like 53, and I really did struggle with the offensive line. So I could definitely, well, I think Jones would be. I think they still like Jones. I think they're still like, I think they had a 2-year plan, obviously, with Jonah, and hoping that Jones develops. And we'll see how it goes from there. Connor was a different story, right? Like, whose spot would he have taken? And I know people are going to, when we talk about one of the guys on mine and maybe on yours, people are going to be like, really, that guy? But, there are, first off, there's only 8 active on game day. So we have to remember that. So positional flexibility matters, right? Like being able to do multiple things. And so I think I truly do think that both Connor and Jones would have made the roster, but I also think, well, I shouldn't say that. I think barring a significant injury in the next 2 weeks, they both will be the IR designated to return. But if one isn't, it would be Connor. I could see them just giving him a redshirt year a la Elijah Jones, right?
Yeah, although with Jones, they did designate him to return later on. But he just never, they did the 3-week practice window and never activated him. For whatever reason, whether it was simply because they didn't have a roster spot or he wasn't fully healthy, whatever that was. But yeah, I think if everyone were healthy, I think all 3, Justin Jones, Christian Jones, and Hayden Connor, would be on the roster. I think they would carry both linemen as the back end that they're gonna they're going to keep inactive because they like them well enough for moving forward. The talk was they really liked how Connor looked, but things could change. Things can change. I wondered with the way that Connor got hurt, both of them, that those could be long-term injuries, and so maybe that's the case. And Justin Jones, I'd like to think doesn't need to go on IR even at all, that he'll be able to contribute in week 1. And the thing is if he is put on the roster and he might miss a game, that will potentially mean that they're going to keep a 7th defensive lineman, right? Well, don't you think?
Yeah, and that's the hard part with Jones. I'm kind of confused on what's going on with Jones, and it's changing. I don't want to say changing, but it's making getting that number to the right number. And so as we'll talk about, I only ended up with 6 defensive linemen right now because I do have Jones on there because I just I don't know what's going on. And
so you're assuming he'll be able to play in week 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my sort of take. And so this is going to be an interesting year in the fact if in fact they have 4 guys start the year on PUP and 2 on injured reserve designated to return, that you'll have a lot of down the road roster decisions. Like they're just pushing, like, how we kick the can with the salary cap. With these guys, they're kicking the can with the roster decision because they don't have to yet. And you never know what the roster is going to look like later on in the season. And so yeah, that's how that ends up going. And that'll be one of the more intriguing things, because the one thing we don't, when it comes to injuries, we're just guessing.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Is like when there's no clarity on that type of stuff, it's hard to have any idea, as you said, what's actually happening.
Yeah, and the other factor is, so if Connor and Jones had suffered season-ending injuries, they probably would have already IR'd them so that they could get a couple of bodies in the building to potentially finish the preseason game. And that was, I think, what was 100% the reason for Donovan West signing, was to make sure that they had an emergency center. Because I'm guessing Sincere Hainsworth is going to play the entire game at center on Saturday, and that not even John Gaines will play. And with Sincere, and since they don't have any other real centers that they would play, that Donovan West, the Arizona State kid that they just signed this week, would be he won't get in the game unless someone gets hurt.
I would agree with that. I mean, I don't see any way, barring, like you said, an injury, that some of these guys are going to get any action.
Yeah. And so with that, coming on next on the Rise of Zero podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. The other thing before we talk about roster projections are potential trades. Are there players on the roster that might have trade value elsewhere that could allow the Cardinals to go a different direction roster-wise? And what positions might the Cardinals target with potential trade back? That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of Seared podcast. Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web is now we look at the possible trades. Every year as roster cuts approach, we get deals. And starting Wednesday became the beginning of the wheeling and dealing as the 49ers traded for a receiver, the Vikings traded a defensive lineman, a bunch of things. And so you're getting these really small deals happening because we're reaching the point where teams know who they're going to and who's not going to make the roster, but have a little value. And so if another team wants them, they can avoid getting nothing for them. And for the receiving team, they can fill a need without having to risk waivers, because especially if you're a team that's not the worst team, like you're not the Titans or to teams like that, you don't know if you're going to get your waiver claims. You don't know that. And so you kind of have to play that by ear. So let's talk potential trades. But first, let's look at positions. I don't want to talk necessarily players because that's diving too deep. But if the Cardinals are going to trade for a position before roster cuts or right at roster cuts, which, by the way, a reminder, roster cut down trades, not new for Monty Ossenford, who has done 4 of them in the last 2 seasons, in the last 2 years. One was the trade to acquire Josh Dobbs. One was to send away Josh Jones. One was to send away Isaiah Simmons in the last offseason when they traded Cam Thomas to the Chiefs. And so this is nothing new for the Cardinals. And so if you're looking at positions, where do you think the Cardinals could address and add players?
You look at where the question marks lie, and I think it's fair to like jump to 3 positions: wide receiver, inside linebacker, and corner, right? And 2 of those positions are questions. Like you look at the cornerback room, and there's just no veteran presence, right? Like, I mean, Max or Garrett Williams is your veteran, and like that's not a shot at Garrett Williams, but like 30-year. That's your veteran. The inside linebacker position, just because as much as we've said it doesn't matter if you're concerned about the play in the preseason. It does matter, right? Like you and I aren't concerned necessarily, but based on the play, if they did make a trade, then it would also signify that we're a little concerned about what's happening, right? So
Yeah.
And then the wide receiver is kind of like corner. I know Zay Jones is in that mix, but I mean, Greg Dortch is kind of, Zay Jones and Greg Dortch being your veteran presence. It makes it really tough when you look at it through that lens. But, that's all just nitpicking, because I don't think that, I mean, if there's an upgrade at wide receiver, if there's a legitimate like veteran corner, then yeah, obviously make a trade. But those guys don't grow on trees and they don't get traded. So
like a guy that came up, I don't know if this is like a real report, but the name Alec Pierce, receiver of the Colts, that would be an interesting trade. Because I think he
offers them something different.
Yes, and he's productive, but he's also not going to change he's not going to command more than he should, right? In terms of his target share.
Yeah, and so he would give them a deep threat, a guy that brings a different look, but he also isn't going to be a guy that's going to disrupt the passing game, right? If anything, he adds to it. He does, like you said, doesn't command more of it.
But I kind of the same thing. If I had to pick one position, I think it'd be cornerback. I think it would be cornerback, where they add somebody, just somebody with a little bit, and it wouldn't be like old veteran.
No, but
maybe like a 4th or a 5th year guy that's on a 1-year deal.
Right, exactly. Like, oh man, I can't believe they got a guy that's signed a 2nd contract.
Now, let's talk about the guys on the roster who could have value, and could be for a number of reasons. One, numbers game. So maybe there's no chance they make the roster, but they have traits that you might have that might be valuable. So others are because they have the most value, and others is simply because you have a different player who can offer sort of the same thing. I actually just published an article about 15 minutes, about an hour before we started recording, that picked out 5 potential targets or 5 players who could have trade value. And I think the guy, I didn't list him number 1, but we've talked about him before. And the current state of the defensive line with injuries makes it less likely, because they might start the year without Walter Nolan, Bilal Nichols, and Justin Jones. And so Dante Stills is probably the most tradable asset in terms of value because he's one, young, two, inexpensive as on the third year of his rookie contract, and been productive because he has 8 sacks in 2 seasons. There's some pass rush and juice there. That said, he's going to be a back of the roster. He's like your defensive lineman 5 or 6. And he also is like he doesn't offer you the same thing as a run stopper. He's definitely a better rushing interior guy. And with the if you want a guy like Elijah Simmons on the roster, or if it's PJ Mustipher on the roster, Stills might give you the best value. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think he is, as we've said before, their most tradable asset. But he might be more, valuable on the team.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where you look at guys, and this is something we really talk about often, right? That value is in the eye of the beholder. I think in terms of like tradable, valuable asset on the roster that isn't like, Marvin Harrison or Paris Johnson, those guys, but like a guy that's a 2 on the depth chart that may, kind of checks some of the boxes. It's Dante Stills, right? Like he would be the one value piece that they could potentially trade. But with the question marks to Justin Jones, the uncertainty surrounding Bilal Nichols, obviously Walter Nolan's issue, like they're not in a position to even entertain it right now, right? Like maybe if they're really confident in Justin Jones and then they look at Elijah Simmons, PJ Mustipher, and they go, okay, one of those guys can fill the Stills role. Maybe, right? Like maybe. But but like if you trade Stills, one, you might get a 4th round pick, which let's be honest, that's a 2-round jump from when he was drafted in 23. So that's getting high return on a pick. But like what I'm just genuinely looking at the roster, like where would value be? We talked about Elijah Higgins going into the season or into the preseason, but like he hasn't exactly set the world on fire, right? Like
No.
So it just, I know people are always be like, oh, Michael Carter, but we talked about Carter earlier, right? Like just
nobody signed Carter, so
right. And so it's just one of those situations where you look at all of, like, you look at the roster and to me, the guys you mentioned, absolutely, like maybe you could get a 7th round pick, right? Like instead of, like you said, a team like, let's just throw a team out there, like Philadelphia, since they won the Super Bowl, to have that 32nd waiver pick, right? And they're like, we don't want to miss out on John Gaines. Let's throw the Cardinals a 7th rounder, and before they cut him. So, there's always that plausibility, but I just don't see it with. Here's the thing: if the Cardinals had value, we wouldn't have the questions we talked about earlier, right? Like, if they had value depth, I guess is the better way to put it.
I do think that there are players that could have some value, like even a 7th. So here are the guys that I put, and I mentioned Dante Stills. I think the next most valuable is B.J. Ojulari if you can activate him off of PUP before, because you can't trade him when they're on a reserve. That doesn't work.
Right.
But because he's a young edge rusher who does have upside, he is a guy who would have potential value. Would you get much from coming off the ACL? No, but it's better than, like, if you've decided to move on already anyway, and you don't have to have a guy with the guaranteed salary sitting as your edge rusher 5. You can get get him in a better situation, maybe get some asset in the future. Cornerback Elijah Jones, he hasn't performed well, but he does have traits, right? He was a third round pick and a team that is looking for that sort of depth. He is long, so he has length, so he's a bigger corner with elite athleticism, and he was a plus special teamer in college as well. And so, you know, while there's not probably a spot on the roster for him here, maybe, just maybe, there's a team that would throw a seventh for him, or a sixth for Jones and a seventh, right?
Yeah, it's something you could look at, but the Jones thing is interesting because it really will come down to what they value, in this case another team, right? Like, what does another team value and what would they be looking for? Would they see him as truly an asset, or is he a guy that they would rather take a flyer on waivers and see if they could get anything out of him?
Yeah. And then the other two guys I put down are Greg Dortch and Joey Blunt. Greg Dortch, not because I think he's going to get cut, but if they like Xavier Weaver, I think Xavier Weaver can do what Dortch does in a better physical frame, right? Because he's faster and bigger than Dortch and can do some of the same things, because he can play in the slot, he can return punts and kicks. And so he could be that gadget player with a higher upside than Dortch. Not saying that Cardinals want to move on from Dortch, but if they like Weaver and they don't want to keep 6 receivers, Dortch is going to have value for somebody because he's a good return guy. He makes plays when he gets the ball. And then Blunt, that's, if someone needs a solid special teams guy, and it might come down to Blunt and Keaton Crawford. And so if they like Keaton a little bit more and they can't keep all 5, one either get cut, but maybe, just maybe, Blunt could go somewhere for a pick swap or something like that.
Yeah, and when you look at how like pick swaps work, it's always something kind of lazy, right? So it's like, and Blount wouldn't fetch this. I don't think Jones would either, but it's always something like you said earlier, like we get a 5th, you get Jones and a 6th, right? Like that's how it always goes. So like you said, it there's very it's a very tricky situation when you're looking at it. Another guy that potentially in that same vein would be Xavier Thomas, right? Now we've talked about the negatives with Thomas in that I think he and Josh Sweat were teammates at one point. He's old, he's legitimately old for a second-year player. And so, you look at that and you go, okay, well, they got him in the 5th. We'll give you a 7th, right? But that again, I feel like he's a lock for the roster with the BJ Ojulari situation. So, it's not as cut and dry as that, right?
Yeah, 100%. And Tom, that's another one that makes sense because he did show a little promise. He's got, edge rushers are a commodity around the league. So I could see that being the case. So yeah, but of course Xavier Thomas is roughly the same age as Victor DeMcKay, who's in his 5th NFL season.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, coming up next on the Rise Up Here podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk Lit. It's time for our 53-man roster questions. That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Here podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the web. We will not have a show after the preseason game before roster cuts because we usually record on Tuesday, and by the time we record Tuesday night, the roster cuts will have been made. So let's get our roster projections on the record in the audio airways on the internet. While I'm sure, Seth, you'll probably write one for the site leading up to it, but some of you listeners might not be regular readers of the site, and some of those readers on the site might not be regular listeners. So we will find out. So for you, how many surprises do you believe were on your final 53?
I'm looking at my list, and I think the bigger surprises come from like who you had to add based on the injuries that we talked about earlier, right? Like, or the uncertainty around injuries. And so that all is like where I was at, because I don't think the names are surprising outside of they probably wouldn't have made the roster if Christian Jones, and if we knew the situation with Christian Jones and Hayden Connor, right?
Yeah. Now that's 100%. And for me, mine's mostly, I would say, chalk, mostly based on what we know.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Quarterback. Do you keep, like, I guess the question is, are you keeping Clayton Tune on the roster?
No,
then neither am I. There's zero precedent for it as well. Well, in addition to Clayton Tune not looking good, and while Jonathan Gannon, you can tell Gannon likes Tune, because Tune didn't look good. Gannon pulled the 10 guys around him comment this week when he talked about them, and when he had him as the backup, like, he believed in it. Like, Gannon does legitimately like Tune. That said, since Gannon's been head coach, Monty Austin-Fort's been the GM, they've never kept more than 2 on the active roster. So I'm not going to begin to do that. When they signed Jacoby Brissett, that was a ticket to the practice squad for Tune. So Kyler Murray, Jacoby Brissett. How many running backs do you keep?
I've got 4.
And I think you're probably going to see me the 4 that make the most sense: Connor, Benson, DeMarcado, and DJ Dallas. Michael Carter doesn't. I mean, he's not better than Benson as the backup. He's not a better third down back as DeMarcado. He's not a better returner or special teams player as either DeMarcado or Dallas. So Carter, practice squad. So yeah, chalk right here. We are not offering each other much debate. What about receiver? 5 or 6 receivers?
I went 6 because I don't know what to make of the last guy. So obviously the top 4, I'm going to guess, were in lockstep.
Yes.
Marv, Michael, Dortch, and Zay, and then I had Simi Fehoko. I think, like we talked about the other day, like the reality of his guarantees makes it basically like he's on the roster.
He wasn't a lock, but like he had to show just enough. And we'll say this: as much as I don't think they need 6 receivers on the roster because they play with 2 tight ends so often, the fact that they went with 6 receivers last year, and one of those guys was Zach Pascal, who offers you nothing as a receiver, tells me they like having a special teams specialist in there. And I think that's the intention with Fehoko this year. That said, I've got 6 as well. Is your number 6? I've got the same 5. I've got Marv, Michael, Zay, Dortch, Fehoko. Who's your number 6?
I went with Weaver.
Yep. Boring. We did it. And my guess is, do you have them keeping 3 or 4 tight ends?
So I did 4 with obviously 3 active on game day, but I don't know. What did you do?
I went with McBride, Ryman, Higgins, and Travis Vokolek, the 4 that they had on the roster last year.
Okay, I have Degura over Vokolek.
Okay, and that's an interesting one for me.
Different.
Yeah. That's one thing different. I do like DeGuara, especially because he's really turned into a fine special teams player.
That was my thought process, but that's also difficult as the 4th tight end, right? Because you're not going to be active.
Tight end is never active,
right? You're not going to be active on game days, so yeah.
And so, like, my reasoning, because they clearly liked Vokolek last year, is that he essentially, by having 4 tight ends on the roster, and I could see where for roster purposes they roster 3 because they only have 3 active on game days, but I think they like Vokolek a lot. What this offers is that you have you have two of each type of tight end, right? You've got
Right.
your receiver tight end. Obviously, that's an elite guy in Trey McBride, but Elijah Higgins, being a former receiver, he can play that. And while Tip Ryman, monster Y tight end, and Vokolek is of that same mold. He's your every team has a big, not super athletic blocking tight end who's not going to catch passes, but feels like there is a Travis Vokolek on literally every team.
Every single team, yeah. So, and there's not a huge difference in he and DeGuara, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then being the DeGuara is that he is a far more accomplished special teams player. But like that was for me, like when you signed him in the offseason, I'm like, ooh, that's a nice guy to have. But if your niche is special teams and you're tight end 4 and tight end 4 is never active, that's a weird guy to have on the roster. Right. How many offensive linemen do you go with? If I knew the health situation, I probably would have kept 10, but I only keep 9 because I think both Hayden Conner and Josh and Christian Jones will end up on IR to start the year.
Yeah, and so I have 9 as well. Obviously, the starting 5: Paris, Evan, Yelda, Isaiah, Jonah. The 2 lead backups, I guess, now locked in. I mean, Beachum was never a question, but now for me, I put John Gaines on there. And then it becomes the last 2, right? Like I would have kept both Connor and excuse me. I would have kept both Connor and Jones, and I probably would have only kept 3 tight ends and then kept Nick Leverett as the other lineman type, because then I would assume that you could have Jones and Connor inactive on game days, and that gives you your 8 Gaines and Leverett as your swing guys in the middle, and then Beachum as your swing tackle.
Yeah.
But without that, I went 9, assuming that both Connor and Jones end up on the IR designated to return, and I kept
Will Hernandez on PUP. Then Will Hernandez on PUP too.
Yeah, and I kept Royce Newman for now.
Interesting, because Newman, for me, after seeing him not get into the game until late, I'm like, dude is gone. And I think quietly, Nick Leverett is a guy that they really like, whether it's because of the Patriots connection, but also because he does offer a lot of versatility. They've played him at tackle. They played him at guard. He's been a center. And so I think the 8 for me locks. The starting 5 plus Beachum as your swing tackle, Leverett as your main backup guard, and Gaines as the backup center. And then I keep Josh Fryer. Their undrafted right tackle out of Ohio State, and he's my number 9.
Yeah, and I can see that over Newman. I was just trying to figure out how to get you and I would agree, right? Like they have to have a backup to the backup tackle, right?
Yeah, so likely. And that could come from the practice squad, because that's basically how they did it last year. Until they went from Jackson Barton to the last 2 years they would just rotate their elevations from the practice squad for that, because Jackson Barton got to play and things like that. And then the kid Charlie Heck as well. But yeah, offensive line, there we go. Defense, and so no real surprises there. My roster surprise comes on the back end, and so we go to the defensive line, and we're both going under the prediction that the 4 guys on PUP will stay on PUP, so we don't have to roster them. That Hayden Conner and Christian Jones will start on IR designated to return. And so that brings us to the defensive line. And because Walter Nolan stays on PUP, and because Bilal Nichols was on PUP, I don't have to keep I don't have to make the hard decision and just keep 7 or cut a guy that I'd want to keep. And so my defensive line is a very easy 6 with Calais, Dalvin Thomas, Tomlinson, Darius Robinson, Justin Jones, Dante Stills, and I keep LJ Collier. I still think that Collier is ahead of a guy like PJ Mustafer.
Yeah, until we know more, they can't keep anybody else. Like, here was my take on it. You can keep a PJ Mustafer. You can keep an Elijah Simmons if you have Walter Nolan and Justin Jones healthy, right? Like, you can end up with those 6, and you can slide a 7th in there. And I know people are going to go, well, this doesn't make sense, but just trust the insanity. Without the knowledge of Justin Jones, you can't have a guy that is a project on there at all. Like, you just can't, because what ends up happening is you have to have a solid 5 that you have to be able to play at any time. And then the question mark is Justin Jones, right? Like, so he's the question. And then we know that they're getting back, Walter Nolan at some point. So it is what it is.
Yeah. I just think, especially with the year that they are trying to have, I think Collier he's
a more reliable.
Option.
Yeah.
He's more reliable.
It's like, so I truly think this, like, if they had their starting 3, which is, Campbell, Tomlinson, Robinson, and they had their main 3, Nolan, Jones, and Stills, I really do think that they would keep a Mustafer or a Simmons. I really do.
Yeah.
But without Nolan, without knowing what Jones is, you just said it. You have to keep Collier. You have to. And because you don't have the time to take chances or develop, because you don't have a Jones and Nolan to fall back on at this point. Now, if Jones was completely healthy, you could talk me into putting a Simmons or Mustafer over Collier 100%. But until we have clarity, and if Jess and I are wrong, we're not going to go, oh, well, we didn't know about Justin Jones, right? Like, but that is the legitimate reason. Like, without clarity on Jones's health, we can't add a unknown or do something like, you have to go with a solid, steady, low impact, veteran that what you're going to get and what you're not going to get from him.
Right. Now, outside linebacker, I did forget that I do predict, I am projecting BJ Ojulari comes off PUP, although that's the most puzzling decision for me because that's just a guess. So I go with 5 edge guys, and because I brought Ojulari back, that means there's no Xavier Thomas. Josh Sweat, Zayvon Collins, Baron Browning, Jordan Birch, BJ Ojulari. Xavier Thomas doesn't make it, but Xavier Thomas easily makes it if Ojulari starts the season on PUP. So for me, it's one or the other.
Yeah, 100%. So go over yours again. Sorry, you cut out for a second on my end.
I got Sweat, Collins, Browning, Birch, and Ojulari, with bumping Thomas off, and then Thomas is the first one on if Ojulari does not come off PUP.
Yeah. So 5. I'm in the same spot. So then that takes us to the inside, and so this is where, and I think we missed this, so we should just throw this out there. So we had 26 on the offense, both of us did. Slight differences at tight end 4 and O-line 9, but 26 nonetheless. That only gives you 24 on the defensive side. So we're at 11 already.
Mine is only, I got 25.
Oh, did you?
Because I kept 9 offensive linemen. I've got 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs. That's 6.
Oh, I know
receivers. That's 12.
You know why? Because I can't add. I have Kyler Murray, Jacoby Brissett, and I wrote the number 3. That's where I saw it.
Yeah,
Okay,
we're both
so yeah,
at 25 because I keep an extra I keep an extra defensive player on
well,
the roster.
that gives me an extra guy to add. I'm excited now. Go ahead. Then
All right.
I gotta decide where this is going.
So inside linebacker, I think we were talking before the show. A guy that's been completely overlooked, and that's JJ Russell, because I thought I recall. I haven't heard much about JJ Russell since he took that brutal hit and had to go to the hospital. But I remember while they were in camp that he was wearing the non-contact jersey, a step out of concussion protocol. So I thought he was out of concussion protocol. He did not get into the game on last Saturday, which to me signals one of two things: that okay, they have a spot for him, or two, there's no shot. Like it's one or the other. He's either locked or no chance at that point if he's healthy. And so I completely overlooked him. If he is a lock, well, then that changes things, because I have 4 inside backers, and the three I think are locks, right? Mac Wilson, Akeem Davis-Gaither, and Cody Simon are locks, and that comes down to the 4th spot. Is it going to be Owen Papo? Is it going to be Mike Walker? Is it going to be JJ Russell? So Mike Walker and JJ Russell are established special teams player in the NFL. Owen Papo has played some special teams and did some nice things on special teams last year, but also has the freakish athleticism. And Papo hasn't looked good in the preseason, but given the decision, for me, it came down to Papo or Walker, because I completely didn't even think about Russell. I gave the edge to Papo because he's got the youth and athleticism. If everything else is equal, they're like, all they're going to do is play special teams, comparing Owen Papo and Mike Walker. If they're equal as special teams player, the upside of Papo to me gives him the edge.
Yeah, and so the one that was I didn't put Russell on there because of, like I said, I
forgot he existed too.
Well, no, I miscounted my overall offense defense. So when you look at it, I think it's Mac, AGD, Simon, and I went Papo as well. And so I'm still trying to decide. Let's go to corners real quick, and then that'll kind of help me. So corners, I had 5.
Mm-hmm. Same.
I assume we have the same 5: Johnson, Melton, Williams, Burke, and Clark.
Yes. And although Clark was the toss-up with Darren Hall.
Yeah, because Darren Hall's played so well, right? Like,
yes. And they offer kind of some of the same things, right?
100%.
Hall does, I think Hall is I think he's a better special teamer than Clark, though Clark's done a lot of special teams. But Hall gives you nickel and safety. Clark does that as well, but also gives you boundary. I don't think Hall can play the boundary well at all. And so Clark gives you a touch more, even if Hall has been the better playmaker, especially in over 2 preseasons. And last year they kept Hall early. He made the roster early, but then was one of the first guys bumped later on. So we'll have to wait and see. For me, Keitrell Clark was slightly over Darren Hall.
Yeah. And then I, again, didn't count correctly, so I only had 4 safeties to start with. Buddha, JT Rabbit, and Keaton Crawford. What'd you go with?
And that's where I kept the extra one. Because I had a spot. I just kept 5. I'm like, I think they would only keep 4 safeties. They'll just figure things out later on. Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how that's going to play out. But I think Blunt's too established for Jeff Rodgers as the special teams coach to take him off. But Keaton Crawford was too valuable to cut.
Yeah.
And so I keep him on the roster. I think who is my who is my player 53? My player 53 is probably Crawford.
Yeah.
And so so he gets bumped for somebody else at some point. And so, but I made, that was the decision. I'm keeping 5. That's something I'm going to worry about later on. Right. And that's sometimes how how teams do that, because they want a guy on there, even if they're not going to play it, but they're like, we'll worry about this later.
Right. Exactly. And I'm with you. So I would probably add Joey Blount to my 53, which would give me 53.
There we go. And that would give us nearly identical rosters.
Right. And we're not going to lie. Like, it's definitely going to be Gillikin, Ryland, and Brewer. So, like, there was no.
Oh, yeah. There's no reason to think that'll do anything different. So, yes, the specialists are set. And we're pretty much so. There are very few so. Josh Fryer is a guy who could make the roster
100%.
So the guys that, might or might not make the roster. So you've got on the offensive line, Josh Fryer's a possibility. You've got Keaton Crawford, their 7th-round pick at safety, Darren Hall or Keitrell Clark. You've got, like we mentioned, the trio of Owen Papo, Mike Walker, and JJ Russell. You've got Xavier Thomas, maybe yes, maybe not. LJ Collier at the back end, maybe PJ Mustipher or Elijah Simmons sneaks on there. But I'm getting more of the feeling that if one of those young D linemen it's going to be Mustipher and not Simmons. Simmons, I think is 100% is a lock for the practice squad. I don't think he's going to be like, someone like he wasn't, I don't think, like, he was an undrafted guy to begin with. And most teams stay with the guys that they had on their roster for the practice squad because they already know the system. They're already in the program. And so unless there's a high upside, they're not going to change that. But by and large, like, we know what's going to be a quarterback. We know what's going to be at running back. We know mostly at receiver. Receiver 6, is Xavier Weaver going to be there or not? The tight ends, is it 3 or 4 tight ends? It's the very back. So there are maybe 6 roster spots that are kind of up for grabs, right?
Right, exactly.
And even then, they're only up for grabs because we're projecting most of the injured players staying injured to start the season.
Yeah, and that's what makes it really difficult, because the injuries, and not necessarily the ones where, I mean, even we are a little, let's not lie, confused with like the pup situation. But even the guys that are healthy, or we know that aren't healthy, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Like, we don't really know anything, and that's what makes it difficult.
Yeah. And with that, that wraps up this edition of the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, episode 689. We will have one show next week. We'll do our roster reactions, and then likely not another show towards the end of the week, and then we will head into week 1. So until then, we've got a preseason game Saturday. We'll be watching that game. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about final predictions, our final rosters. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, be Red C-Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.
Rise up! Rise